Good evening, and tonight we begin with a story that is not about the front lines themselves, but about the human machinery that keeps a war going. It is about paperwork and people, about systems under strain, and about a country trying to hold itself together while defending itself. Ukraine has a new defense minister. His name is Mykhailo Fedorov. And in his first public accounting of the state of the military, he did something notable. He did not offer slogans. He did not offer reassurances. He offered numbers. He described in plain terms what is happening inside Ukraine's armed forces as the war with Russia continues. And what he described was not small. It was not tidy. It was, in his telling, vast. According to Fedorov, roughly 200,000 Ukrainian service members have deserted, not rotated out, not wounded and discharged. Deserted. That is the word he used to describe the scale of the problem. At the same time, he said, millions of Ukrainians have avoided conscription altogether, not delayed, not deferred, avoided. This is happening while the country remains under invasion, while the demand for manpower remains acute, and while the war shows no sign of simply stopping. Now, when a defense minister says something like that out loud, it lands with weight. It is not rhetoric. It is not framed as a warning or a threat. It is a statement of condition. He also spoke about why this is happening, or at least what is making it harder to respond. He pointed to bureaucratic inefficiencies inside the military system, layers of process that do not move quickly, systems that are not keeping up with the demands placed on them. And then there is the money. Fedorov said there are funding shortfalls, not abstract budget concerns, but real gaps that affect how the military functions day to day. Gaps that matter when you are trying to supply, train, track, and retain a force under constant pressure. As one might say when reading those remarks, that's a lot to take in. Because these are not problems at the margins. These are not isolated failures. These are structural challenges described by the person now responsible for the entire defense apparatus of a country at war. Fedorov's remarks sketch a picture of strain, not collapse, not defeat, but strain, the kind that accumulates quietly until someone names it. He did not frame desertion as betrayal. He did not describe draft avoidance as treason. He described them as challenges the military is facing, challenges that exist alongside ongoing defense operations against Russia's invasion. That framing matters. It tells us how the issue is being approached, at least publicly. This is not about blame in his telling, it is about capacity. And when he talked about bureaucracy, he did not describe a single office or a single delay. He described inefficiencies, plural, a system that is not streamlined, not responsive enough for the moment it is in. That matters because modern warfare, especially prolonged warfare, is as much about administration as it is about tactics. It is about getting the right people to the right place at the right time, with the right equipment, under the right authority. If that system falters, the consequences ripple outward. Not all at once, but steadily. One line from his remarks lingers, a short line, almost understated. These problems exist, he said in essence, and they must be dealt with. Or, as it might be said on air quietly, this is what reality looks like. Fedorov's comments did not come with a list of solutions. They did not come with timelines or guarantees. They came as a description of the landscape he has inherited. A landscape shaped by years of war, by sudden mobilization, by prolonged stress on a society and its institutions. A landscape where maintaining defense against an invading force requires not only weapons and strategy, but compliance, coordination, and resources. The mention of millions avoiding conscription is particularly striking, not because avoidance is unheard of in wartime, but because of the scale described. Millions. That is not a rounding error. That is a demographic reality. And yet, again, he did not dramatize it. He stated it, as if laying out a map before deciding where to go next. There is a certain gravity in that approach. It suggests an effort to ground the conversation in facts as they are, not as they might be wished to be. These are the numbers, the tone implies. This is the system, this is what we are working with. As Ukraine continues to defend itself against Russia's invasion, those internal dynamics become part of the battlefield. Not visible in satellite images, not captured in daily briefings, but present all the same. And so tonight we start here, with an acknowledgement from the very top of Ukraine's defense leadership that the fight is not only out there, but also inside the structures meant to sustain it. One quiet sentence sums it up best. This is hard, it seems to say, without ever saying it outright. When Mykhailo Fedorov stepped into his role as defense minister, he inherited not just a war, but an administrative reality shaped by that war. And in describing that reality, he focused not on battlefield maneuvers, but on the internal mechanics that make sustained defense possible. He spoke about desertion first, about 200,000 cases by his account. That number stands on its own, stark and heavy, because it represents people who were once counted inside the system and are no longer there. Not transferred, not reassigned, gone. In a military engaged in ongoing defense against an invasion, every absence matters. But at this scale, the issue becomes structural. It affects planning, readiness, and trust in the numbers themselves. Fedorov did not describe these desertions as sudden or mysterious. He did not attach motive or moral judgment. He presented them as a challenge the military is confronting, alongside others, at the same time. And then there is the draft. Millions, he said, have avoided conscription. Again, he chose a word that carries meaning without elaboration. Avoided. Not evaded in secret necessarily. Not captured and punished. Simply avoided. This tells us something about the limits of enforcement, about the reach of the state in a moment of prolonged crisis, and about the tension between the need for manpower and the capacity to compel it. Fedorov's comments suggest a system under pressure from multiple directions at once. On one side, the demand to maintain defensive operations against Russia's invasion. On the other, the administrative and financial constraints that shape how that demand can be met. Bureaucratic inefficiencies were a central part of his account. He did not single out individuals or departments. He spoke instead of process, of systems that move too slowly, of layers that complicate rather than facilitate action. In wartime, bureaucracy does not disappear. In fact, it often grows. New rules, new reporting requirements, new chains of command emerge in response to urgent needs. Over time, those additions can become obstacles themselves. Fedorov acknowledged this openly, not as an abstract management concern, but as a real factor affecting the military's ability to function effectively. And then there is funding. He said there are shortfalls. Again, no embellishment, no dramatic language, just the acknowledgement that resources are not sufficient to cover all needs. Funding shortfalls in a military context can mean many things: delays, gaps, incomplete programs, strained logistics. And while he did not specify which areas are most affected, the implication is clear enough. A military defending a country under invasion requires sustained investment. When that investment falls short, the strain shows up everywhere else. One line, brief and restrained, seems to echo through his remarks. We have to deal with what exists. It is a simple idea, but it frames everything else. These are not hypothetical problems. They are present conditions. What is striking about Fedorov's account is not just what he says, but what he does not say. He does not promise quick fixes. He does not suggest that these challenges will resolve themselves. He does not minimize their scale. Instead, he places them on the table as facts. That approach carries its own weight. In a country at war, public statements by defense officials are often calibrated for morale. They emphasize resilience, unity, determination. Those themes may still exist elsewhere, but here the emphasis is different. Here the emphasis is on accuracy. By acknowledging desertion, draft avoidance, inefficiency, and funding gaps, Fedorov is describing the internal battlefield, the one that determines whether external defense can be sustained over time. This is not a story about failure. It is a story about friction, the kind that builds up when systems designed for peacetime are forced to operate under constant emergency conditions. And that friction does not disappear just because the stakes are high. If anything, the stakes make it more consequential. The scale of avoidance he described suggests a civilian population making individual calculations under extraordinary circumstances. Again, Fedorov does not analyze those choices. He does not attribute motives. He simply notes the outcome. Millions are not entering the system. 200,000 have left it. Those numbers exist alongside ongoing operations, ongoing defense, ongoing resistance to invasion. That coexistence is the reality he is outlining. At one point, the tone of his remarks feels almost administrative, as if he is briefing colleagues rather than addressing the public. That, too, is telling. It suggests that the intended audience may include policymakers, lawmakers, and officials who need to understand the scope of the challenge in order to respond to it. And perhaps it is also meant to prepare the public for difficult conversations ahead. Conversations about reform, about enforcement, about funding priorities. Though again, he does not go there explicitly, he stays with description. There is no easy version of this, the subtext seems to say. There is only the real one. In that sense, Fedorov's outline functions as a baseline, a starting point. Before solutions can be debated, the problem must be named, and tonight, that naming matters, because it reminds us that wars are not sustained by will alone. They are sustained by systems, and systems, like people, can become exhausted. The defense of Ukraine continues. That fact remains unchanged. But alongside it now sits a candid account from the country's new defense minister about what that defense is costing internally, in numbers, in resources, and in administrative capacity. One short, quiet line captures the mood. This is where we are. By the time Mykhailo Fedorov finished outlining the state of Ukraine's military, the picture he left was neither dramatic nor reassuring. It was precise. And precision in this context carries its own weight. He described a military still engaged in defending the country against Russia's invasion, while simultaneously grappling with internal challenges that affect how that defense is sustained. Desertion on the scale of roughly 200,000 individuals, draft avoidance involving millions, bureaucratic inefficiencies that slow response, funding shortfalls that limit capacity. None of those elements exists in isolation. Together they describe a system operating under prolonged strain. What matters most about this accounting is not any single figure, but the fact that they were presented together by a newly appointed defense minister as part of one coherent reality. This was not a warning about something that might happen. It was not a projection. It was a description of what is already happening. Fedorov did not frame these challenges as temporary anomalies. He did not suggest they were the result of a single failure or a momentary lapse. He spoke of them as conditions embedded in the current state of the military. That distinction matters, because when challenges are described as conditions, they require structural responses, not slogans, not short-term fixes. They require changes in how systems operate, how resources are allocated, and how authority is exercised. Yet, in his remarks, Fedorov stopped short of prescribing solutions. He did not lay out reforms. He did not announce new policies. He did not promise that these problems would be solved quickly or at all. Instead, he established the baseline. This is the system as it exists now. This is the scale of the issue. This is the environment in which decisions must be made. There is a certain discipline in that approach. In wartime especially, there is pressure to project certainty, to emphasize strength, to minimize weakness. Fedorov chose a different route. He acknowledged the limits of the system he now leads. The acknowledgement of bureaucratic inefficiency is particularly telling. Bureaucracy is often discussed as an abstract inconvenience, something that frustrates but does not fundamentally alter outcomes. In a military context, under conditions of invasion, inefficiency becomes consequential. Delays in processing, gaps in coordination, confusion over responsibility. These are not minor inconveniences when lives and territory are at stake. By naming inefficiency as a challenge, Fedorov is implicitly recognizing that administrative capacity is part of national defense. The same is true of funding. Shortfalls are not just accounting problems. They shape what can be purchased, what can be maintained, what can be replaced, and what must be deferred. Over time, those decisions accumulate. Fedorov did not specify where funding is lacking. He did not rank priorities. He simply stated that the resources available are not sufficient to meet all needs. Again, it is a description, not a debate. The scale of draft avoidance he described adds another layer. Millions of people remaining outside the conscription system while the country remains at war suggests a gap between policy and participation. Fedorov did not characterize that gap. He did not moralize it. He did not propose enforcement mechanisms. He acknowledged it as a reality the defense ministry must contend with. Taken together, these elements form a portrait of a military that is functioning but under strain, defending the country but constrained by internal limitations. One short line seems to resonate beneath the surface of his remarks. This is not theoretical. It captures the sense that these are not abstract challenges to be discussed in committee rooms alone. They are lived realities affecting how the war is fought and sustained. For the public, Fedorov's accounting offers a rare glimpse behind the curtain, not into tactics or classified operations, but into the administrative backbone of the war effort. It reminds us that defense is not only about what happens at the front, it is also about who shows up, who stays, who is funded, and how decisions move through institutions. And it underscores something else as well. That transparency, even when it reveals difficulty, can serve a purpose. By laying out these challenges openly, Fedorov sets the terms of the conversation going forward. Any discussion of reform, enforcement, or funding will now take place against the backdrop he has defined. There is no pretending these issues do not exist. They have been named. That does not resolve them, but it does change how they are understood. As the war continues, Ukraine's defense will depend not only on external support and battlefield outcomes, but on the internal capacity of its institutions to adapt under pressure. Fedorov's remarks do not tell us how that adaptation will happen. They tell us why it is necessary, and perhaps that is the point. One quiet, resonant line could serve as the emotional center of this entire accounting. You can only work with what is real. It is a statement that carries no judgment, no optimism, no despair, just acknowledgement. Tonight, that acknowledgement stands as the closing note of this story. A new defense minister outlining the realities he faces. A military under strain, still defending. A system confronting its own limits in the midst of war. There are no conclusions here about what comes next. Only a clear sense of where things stand. And sometimes, in the middle of a long and ongoing conflict, that clarity is the most important thing that can be offered.